Take yourself back to grade 7 English. A scary thought, I know. You're reading a book and each group has been assigned a chapter and is going to be presenting back to the class. But rather than follow your teacher's instructions, you find this book so intriguing that night you go home and read the whole thing. That was me. In grade 7, I decided to read the entire Constitution. I was so interested in this document that I somehow muddled through its archaic legalese in my quest to find out what was so special about our country's rulebook. I ended up quite disappointed. Flipping through its pages, I didn't understand how these 128 sections, many of which seemed irrelevant, ruled our country. For what was meant to be Australia's most important law, I didn't feel like the Constitution was Australian. Grade 7 me, surprisingly, was right. The Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act 1900 is a British law, and it reads like one. Although popular culture has created this myth that our Constitution is based in the fair go, in being Aussie, this document doesn't even mention the Prime Minister, let alone our country's values like multiculturalism, equality, or mateship. In 2024, Australia may be legally independent, but our foundational law still reads as if we're some colony of the UK. So, why hasn't this changed? I mean, after all, Australia used to be at the forefront of change. We were so innovative that some members of British Parliament didn't want to pass our constitution because they thought it was too radical. And yet, 120 years later, we're letting the past rule us because we're so unwilling to change these rules. Our Constitution is meant to be like a home, a sturdy shelter that protects us from the worst of nature and humanity. But rather than being modern, our home is more like an abandoned countryside mansion, full of ghosts of the past and slowly falling apart. We have tried to refurbish it 45 times, but only 8 of these attempts have succeeded. And at most, they were like DIY projects, just painting the ceiling rather than an actual renovation. Young people are disenchanted with government. And I would compare this to a teenager wanting to move out of their parents' home. But our Constitution is not our parents' home. It was written in the 1890s. It's more like our great-great-great-great-grandparents' home, and it's clear that we're sick of living here. Only 22% of young Australians have trust in government. Civic engagement is plummeting, and the youth enrolment rate consistently falls behind the national average. Young people no longer trust in the democratic process to deliver change. But this shouldn't be unexpected. The structure of our democracy just isn't aligned with what young people value. Phrases like education, climate, or human rights aren't listed in the Constitution. So it's no wonder that the federal government is struggling to tackle these issues. It would be like expecting a house without electricity to have a TV. It just won't happen. Some claim that, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and that government still works to some degree. But if we adopt this point of view, we end up like the US, where people are driven towards populist authoritarianism because they no longer trust in the ability of their outdated institutions to change. So, what do we need to fix? To start, let's get rid of the ghosts. There are so many parts of the Constitution which are functionally inoperative. For For example, 5 sections refer to the Interstate Commission, a body which hasn't existed since the 1920s. Next, some new furniture, because the parts of the Constitution that we actually rely on are just reinterpreted over and over again by the High Court to keep our system workable. At the end of the day, this is putting lipstick on a pig, and the court can only tweak the Constitution's meaning, rather than bringing its 120-year-old words into the 21st century. Finally, some home decor. Because the Constitution isn't just some fancy government rulebook. It's the contract between the Australian people and our government. It should reflect what we care about. In America, it's we the people. France has a Charter of the Environment, while Germany constitutionally prohibits aggressive warfare. Each country has its own little flair. Unfortunately, as grade 7 me learnt, ours is nothing like this. It's just boring, British, and has nothing to do with contemporary Australia. So, what has been the barrier to change? Ironically, the process which we hail as the pinnacle of our democracy is responsible for its unravelling, the referendum. Most Australians, thankfully, aren't lawyers, but this also means that they don't understand the complex intricacies of constitutional law. And due to the high stakes and black or white nature of referendums, they have a 17% success rate. Now, a thought bubble. I'd like for you to imagine that you're a politician. In all honesty, you've probably backstabbed a few people to get where you are, and you really, really want to stay in Parliament. That's your way of affecting change. So knowing that a referendum will probably fail, why would you spend half a year campaigning for it? It will use up so much of your time and your precious resources, and it won't make you any more popular. In fact, you'll probably lose votes because of it. As our politicians become more and more risk-averse, the ambition for constitutional change has declined. In the past 40 years, we've had half the number of referendum questions that we had in the previous 40. That means last year was the first time anyone born after 1981 voted in a referendum. But what about those who were too young to vote last year? Well, who knows when they'll get a say in whether we should renovate our great-great-great-grandparents' house. After all, no party has an actual plan for major constitutional reform. When you renovate a house, its residents decide on the home's general theme and appearance, but we leave regulatory compliance and structural integrity to local councils and architects, because we understand that some things are better dealt with by experts. A vote of the people might make sense for social issues, like whether we become a republic. But changes to the structural nature of our federation or updating the Constitution's archaic wording should be put through without the need for this fraught process. Society changes, and our fundamental rules need a way to change with it so that government can actually do its job, rather than having to figure out how to navigate this archaic document. If not referendums, then what else? Well, let's be honest, I could do another whole speech about this. But at the end of the day, whether we adopt the Spanish, Canadian, or Finnish models, practically anything is better than our current system, where we rely on unelected and unaccountable judges to be the sole change makers to our country's most important law. But changing the way we change our constitution is a mammoth task. And the most important thing you can do is to be more open towards constitutional change. Our default position is to vote no to referendums. It's easy to be afraid of change and just say no, stick with the status quo. But as we've learnt today, constitutions aren't just any old thing. We must put in the effort to be engaged, to educate ourselves about these complex issues and develop more nuanced opinions than don't know, vote no. Now, I know, it's hard to be engaged in the current political environment. Everyone seems hopeless and completely uninspiring. But if we simply shrug our shoulders and accept that as the way it is, nothing will ever change. Grade 7 me became so interested in this little booklet, in our Constitution, because he couldn't believe it ruled our country. Now, I'm not saying that you have to be a nerd like me, but it's up to us to break this myth that our Constitution is fine. And as politicians only care about vote-winning issues, it's also up to us to want change. Because that's the only way we'll get to a point where people are excited to go vote. Not because of the sausage sizzle, but because they are proud of our democracy.